The ninth room of the dungeon lies beyond the archway the Alkilith created, and once the players enter here, they are going to enter this place through the western corridor, right through the wall. And the very first thing they will notice is how dark the place is, apart from the white, bright light emanating from the central chamber. There is a pedestal in the central chamber, and a silver chalice is placed on top of it, and that's emanating the bright white light. And right behind it is standing a maiden in a kind of a gown and a headdress, looking also quite angelic, emanating this same serene white light. The corridor is pretty dark apart from that, and the players would notice that the floor is seemingly made out of white marble that is shaped to look like cobblestones. But once you go further, you would notice that in the central chamber, the cobblestone floor is kind of broken up. All the cobblestones are separated by like a 1-inch gap from one another, and each one of the stones is leading downwards, almost like they're all pillars rising from the depths. And there are depths deep enough for no player character to be able to see far enough into, and there's also mist rising from these depths. There's enough mist to make this look almost like a Turkish sauna that only the bright white light is penetrating through and creating a kind of a visible area for everyone to gaze around. The central chamber is a kind of a domed ceiling kind of a place. It's a dimension chamber, as it's labeled. The domed ceiling is going to be filled with sculptures, and all these sculptures are going to have a kind of a grotesque H.R. Geiger kind of feel to them. They are going to be images that depict all sorts of like mixtures of astrological kind of mysticism and the sort of grotesque bodily function kind of protrusions of all sorts of tubes and guts going in and out of all sorts of eye sockets and mouths and nostrils and ear holes. But they all are images that are made up of hundreds and hundreds of tiny images that create mere abstractions. When players would go and stare at these pictures, they can be very dazzling and very dizzying and very confusing, as they seem to simply just include more and more depth, more and more tiny little images that have nothing to do with the greater whole that your mind is creating when you gaze upon this domed ceiling. The person in the middle of the room is the Celadon Queen. Now, she is going to be a main antagonist of this entire dungeon, at least for a long while. So she will only be here as a kind of a social encounter. She is an elder oblex, or rather, she is a simulacrum of an elder oblex, which is a creature in the Mordenkainen books. It's pretty much one of the strongest oozes there are. It's an incredibly intelligent creature that can devour minds and intellects and souls, basically, of its victims, and by doing so, it can create these sort of simulacrums that it uses to probe and kind of fool its followers and unknowing victims. The Celadon Queen has a sort of Cenobite-like demeanor from Hellraiser. It's a kind of mysterious, enigmatic kind of figure. She is here to use this chamber to contact her followers and her minions all throughout the mortal realms, who are all tasked with bringing her terror-filled morsels for her to devour with her powers. The warlock that lived in the hunting cabin that the players came from has caused displeasure and unwanted attention to the Celadon Queen's operations, so being a completely a kind of easily removable, little irritant of a follower, she merely decided to not deal with the problem of his his incompetence and simply killed him and his goons because they were planning on doing something very different. The warlock was a scaredy cat, a coward, and a pussy. He was basically doing the Celadon Queen's bidding for a while when it granted him power, but at some point his goons would have recommended that they're not that interested in the supernatural powers. Instead, they just want money and influence in the criminal world, so they started to come up with the reasons to create a flesh market and start basically trading in humans, and especially humans whose minds have been stolen and devoured by the Celadon Queen, so that they would basically trade in sex slaves that are mere zombies to be used and abused. And that kind of entailed all sorts of horror in the mind of the warlock, who basically just started to second guess everything. And once the authorities, the investigator, got on their trail and was starting to, the noose was starting to tighten, the Celadon Queen simply felt that her minion was an incompetent and decided to be done with them in a swift fashion, and so she cursed them to turn into ooze-like creatures like her, only very, very much lower tier creatures. And when the players arrive, she will have mild interest in them. She might probe their minds, their personalities, their demeanors, their natures a little bit. She might speak with them in riddles. She might be brazen enough to simply tell them that they have arrived into her weeping palace in Molor, one of the layers of the abyss, and basically that they should abandon all hope, because they are trapped here and they will suffer a horrifying death as a result. And because she only dines on morsels that are completely crippled with terror, encountering D&D adventurers who are all brash, brazen, bold, and curious and confident, she has no interest in them. So instead she will, after conversing with them a little while, she will open the gates to the east of her chamber and simply welcome them to explore her palace and the lair of Molor, and basically hope that next time she meets them, their minds will have been broken and they will be tasty morsels for her to feast on. Once that happens, once the social encounter is over, she will indeed gesture to them to the eastern gate, which will open with her telekinetic powers, and the mist will kind of start to rise further and further, and the simulacrum, will disappear in the steam. So that she will leave this room. The players are free to do whatever they want in this room before they would leave, but there isn't much to do, really, not without having supernatural powers that can basically manipulate and use this dimensional chamber to contact alkyliths that are all around the mortal realm that serve the Celadon Queen. The players can look at the chalice that's on the pedestal. The chalice is a magical item, and it's almost also kind of a trap, because if a player touches it and the player is a non-evil character of a non-evil alignment, they will suffer 3d10 psychic damage from touching it. For this is a chalice of earthly delights. It's a magic item where if you are attuned to it and within its proximity while committing horrifying, vile acts of immorality, it will fill up, and drinking from it will induce a kind of an ecstatic state of absolute pleasure in the kind of sadistic immorality you're committing. So basically, it's the Celadon Queen's way of providing it with even further pleasure and intoxication from devouring minds of her victims. The players will most likely have no use for this item, but it's there to add to the tone. And once the players exit through the gate, they will witness the outdoors of the of Molor, and they will also witness the outer structure of the Weeping Palace that the Elder Oblex, that the Celadon Queen lives in. And I'm going to show you a picture I drew of the Celadon Queen now.